Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. I was traveling for business. I do it often, and I stay in the same hotel every single time. It's a great little place, perfect for me anyways, and I had to run a few errands before checking in, so I arrived a bit later than normal. It was raining, really hammering down, and I got soaked through as I ran from my car to the lobby. I didn't bring an umbrella or a coat. God. And I was glad that I already grabbed some dinner, so I went straight to the room. I filled the tub up and had a bath and jumped into bed. I was shattered. Thunder and lightning woke me. It was so loud. I rolled over in bed and something caught my eye. I saw a shadow at the window. I wanted to get up and see if someone was there, but I couldn't move. It was like sleep paralysis or something, and whenever lightning flashed, I saw the shadow at the window. I couldn't speak, I couldn't move, all I could do was stare in horror towards the window. Thunder boomed one more time, and suddenly, the shadow was gone and I was able to move again. I went to the window and there was no one there, and then the lightning had stopped. There was no moonlight, so I couldn't see anything. I got back into bed and went to sleep. I mean, what else could I have done? The next morning at breakfast, I spoke to a hotel employee and told him about what happened. I told him that there was some figure, shadow or silhouette or whatever that was peering at me through the window. The employee asked what room I was staying in, and then when I told him, he said that my story couldn't possibly be true. I asked him what he meant and he said, "There's no corridor where your room's window is. If someone was there, they might have been 10 foot tall." I was dumbstruck and a bit annoyed with his cocky answer. He offered to prove it to me, so off I went to take a look. We used to have stairs there, but they collapsed due to age. They were warded off from the public, and they were so dilapidated that there was a gaping hole in the middle of them. He was right. There was nowhere for anyone to stand near the window. The hotel employee couldn't believe it. He even looked a bit shaken up, and he said no one else had said anything about that room or a shadow peering at them while they slept. I went to a party. It was a mixer, as I was a single guy and I had high hopes on meeting a woman. But I struck out and went home alone. I had a few drinks, but I was nowhere near drunk. Bit of a bad night, but oh well. I had missed the last train of the night, and I needed to get back to the other side of Osaka as I had work in the early morning. I was really disappointed that I missed my train. I didn't see a single taxi on the street, and I started walking in the general direction of my side of town. I had been walking for some time, occasionally turning towards the oncoming traffic with my thumb out to see if someone would give me a ride, but I was getting nowhere. It was really dark, and the longer that I walked, the fewer cars passed me by. I was getting pretty worried. I kept glancing over my shoulder to see if anyone was following me, but thankfully, I was alone. I had given up with a hitchhiking idea at this point, when a dark gray van was rumbling along the road behind me. It passed me, then slowed down to a stop, but beneath a street lamp. I saw the silhouette of the driver, and the passenger side window glided down. Oh, God, what is this? I stopped walking, and I stood there just behind the van. I could see the driver leaning towards the passenger window. I think they were saying something, but I couldn't hear it over the hum of the engine. "Over here," I heard her say. I shook my head to indicate that I hadn't heard what she was saying. "Know where street is?" She was asking for directions, but I still hadn't heard her. Something about this was a bit off. It was really late at this point. I leaned closer to the window, and she had long dark hair and a very pale complexion. She was wearing a white blouse, and she was a beauty. "Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Where are you trying to go?" I asked. She smiled and said, "Why don't you climb in?" Whoa, I didn't know what to say. I was flattered. Maybe my luck with the ladies was about to turn, but I needed to be cautious though. "I thought you just wanted directions," I asked. "Just get in. I want to talk a bit. Let me ask you something." "I can hear you from here," I said, keeping my guard up. "Don't be like that. I just want to talk to you," she said. "About what?" She started to unfasten her top button of her blouse. "Get in and find out," she said as she unfastened another. "Please," she whined. "But what are you scared of?" she cooed as she unfastened more and more buttons. "I don't think so," I said. "But aren't you lonely out here walking by yourself? Don't you need a ride home?" "No, I gotta go," I said firmly, and she kept going, revealing more to me. "Will you get in now?" "No thanks," I mumbled. My willpower was crumbling at this offer of a ride, and most likely more, but just barely audible. I heard a noise over the sound of the engine that I'm sure saved my life that night. I heard some laughter somewhere behind her in the van. I knew it definitely wasn't her laugh because it sounded deeper. It sounded like there were men back there. I ran fast and as far as I could through as many back alleys that I could find, and I got to a train station and called a taxi from a phone booth. Be careful out there, guys. I was bored, so I Googled my own name. It's a bit dumb really, but I guess we've all done it. I found a bunch of pages with my full name on them, maybe 10 or so, mainly LinkedIn pages or Facebook profiles, people with totally different lives to mine. Then I found a blog. It was called My Full Names page. It was a simple blog, didn't look very professionally made either. Just a private blog kind of thing, maybe like a diary. It was quite interesting as the person who ran the blog was about the same age as me and had the same interest and hobbies as me. As I scrolled through the blog, I noticed that there were 5 or 6 regular commenters, nothing special at all, and yet somehow I found myself checking in on the blog from time to time, watching for new content. It was like reading a diary. And one post caught my attention. It went like this. It was a hot one today, but it was a great day to watch soccer and see Japan win. Something like that. I can't really remember. But what was striking was the fact that it was very similar to what I did that day. I watched soccer that day and the admin from the blog must have been in the same stadium. Of course, I chalked this up to coincidence and nothing more at that time. A really bad move on my part. The next day I checked the blog and it read, "Having a bad day today. I messed up at work. This was odd because I was down that day due to making a mistake at work too. Then day after day after day, I kept checking the blog and noticing more and more coincidences and similarities between me and the author or admin. It was like reading a blog about my life, and it was weird. Another post said, "After work, I bought a CD and then ate curry for dinner in a restaurant." Okay, now I knew it wasn't a coincidence. As the days turned to weeks, I started to get paranoid. The owner of the blog received birthday wishes from the few who commented. And yeah, as you might have guessed, the same birthday as me. I should have taken that as a sign to quit looking at that blog, but I didn't. My curiosity got the best of me. I decided to comment, using a pseudonym of course, but when I went to write, I realized that it was just a bulletin board, a page that you cannot interact with despite the page having comments. This was weird, but I wanted to find out what this page was about. It was so eerie, so I sent an email to the admin. "Hey, nice to meet you. I have the same as you and I often visit the site." Something like that, a pretty bland email. And the next day that I decided to check on the page, it had been deleted. That was pretty creepy, so I then went to my emails and I got a reply from the admin, and all it said was, "Found you." I got the hell out of my apartment and I am now staying with a friend. I will post more soon if anything happens, but I hope it's just a prank or something. Note: there have been no further posts in this thread. This is a true and mysterious event which happened to me and some friends one summer night a few years ago. Every summer, a couple of old school best friends and I get together and we go on a little trip together. On the year this occurred, we had all decided on renting a cottage in the woods, and it was going to be great. We were going to have barbecue and a campfire. It was the usual crew, me and 2 other friends, and we are all females by the way. My friend drove and it took hours to get there. It was already evening by the time that we got to the cottage, and we were all hungry. We had prepared for this though. We brought all our barbecue gear and we were ready to feast. We had a great night, chatting and reminiscing by the log fire, and of course, eating way too much. And even though it was summer, the sun had already set by about 8, so that was our call to head back into the cottage. It was a real shame though. I suddenly had the urge to go to a hot spring, and I know this sounds a little odd, but it's called an onsen in Japanese, and we love going to them in the summer. I mentioned it to the others and everyone was on the same page, and we got fired up since we were all tired and full. Well, the cottage didn't have a hot spring, so we hit a dead end. And not wanting to slow down or waste the trip, I got my phone out and started Googling to see if there were any springs nearby, and we were just in luck. There was one only a short drive away, and we quickly packed some clothes and then jumped back in the car. Since we weren't familiar with the area, we were completely dependent on the car navigation system. The narrow roads were so dark since the forest was all around us. I didn't want to get lost out here, and I was starting to lose faith in my idea. But then we turned onto a highway road. The mood lifted in the car and we were back to chatting and laughing. Right. The satellite navigation system interrupted, and it was just the one word. I noticed this because usually, the satellite navigation system said, "After 100 meters, turn right." I thought it was odd, but I didn't care that much. Another odd thing was, It asked us to turn while we were in a curve in the road, and we turned back a little, and at the exact same point in the road the satellite navigation system said, "Right." These country roads were very narrow. We didn't see the dirt road the first time, but spotted it when we doubled back. We obeyed the satellite navigation and then turned down that road. The laughter and sense of excitement in the car ebbed away and was replaced with a sense of anxiety. This road, it didn't seem like it was leading us to the hot springs. The forest just got steeper and steeper and darker. I felt as if we were moving further from the town and from people, and I started to doubt the existence of the hot springs. We ceased talking at this point. The air in the car was thick with tension, and I wanted to turn back, but I knew that we couldn't. The road was only just wide enough for our car, and there was no way that we could do a U-turn. I started to worry, and I wondered what might happen if an oncoming car came at full speed. Since we didn't know where we were, we decided that we would stop and then check out our surroundings. I was amazed to discover that we were nearing a cliff edge. I had no idea that we had driven this high up in the mountains and was lost for words, as so were my friends. And fear now had a grip on us. Forget the hot spring. We just needed to get back to somewhere familiar. No one said a word, and I am glad that they didn't, because I was just panicking. We just stared at one another's faces in the dark and wondered what to do. We had no choice but to keep going forward because the road was simply not wide enough to turn back. I knew deep down that we were moving further and further from the town, the people, and the lights. And just as our anxiety reached its peak, my friend spotted a point in the road up ahead where it widened. Relieved, we sped towards it to perform that U-turn that would get us out of the mountainous woods. Then the car's headlights illuminated a building. A building almost crumbled to ruins. A derelict and frightening-looking place, and in that moment we laid eyes on it, we heard, "You have arrived at your destination." Then the power in the car went out. We panicked, but it came back on instantaneously. We turned around and headed back to the safety of the cottage. There was no hot spring. There was no way that creepy building in the woods could have ever been a hot spring either. I cannot forget that event, and we often talk about it when we meet up. Perhaps we were summoned or called by something in that abandoned building. It was so scary. This happened about 11 years ago. Back then, I had just broken up with my girlfriend, and let's call her Y. About a week after our breakup, I started to get text messages from an unknown number. Let me sum up what the first message said. "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is T. I work with Y, and the truth is, I started to really like her. I know that you have dated her, so I thought I'd come to you for some advice." My first reaction was, "What the hell? Who the hell does that? Why would this guy know my details and about my relationship with Y?" The text gave off such a creepy vibe. It was actually longer than that. It stated in more depth about his love for my ex, and it ended with this total beta sentence. "Please, teach me how you got her to love you." You know, notice me senpai bullshit. I thought of ignoring it, but I had a few beers on board, so I decided to reply, and I found it funny in a way. I said something like, "I haven't been in touch with Y, but you know that it might not be the best timing, but if you really like her that much, then I guess it's up to you to let her know." Anyway, I got a reply about an hour later that said, Thank you very much for your reply and for your support. It gave me courage. I'm so glad. I'll do my best. And as you might have guessed, I didn't reply to that. From then on, I got a text from this guy every single day. It was so cringy. Some text messages said, "Thank you so much for your words of encouragement. They gave me the strength and courage that I need." Yep, I didn't reply to that. It was so weird, but this guy would text even if I didn't reply. Another one he sent, "I summoned the strength to speak to her today. At work today, we had a place in order for stock and it was so great." Another one, "She bumped into me on the way to work. It was so great, my friend, and we talked about stuff besides work." I didn't give a shit about him, and he sounded like a major creep, so again, I didn't reply. But it was kind of interesting for a while to get a daily report of this weird dude's life. It was around this point that the content of his text changed. Why doesn't Y know how I feel? Why isn't she noticing my advances? She must have loads of boyfriends or male friends, whatever. Why does everyone laugh at me when I speak to her? I see people trying to hide their smiles. I hate girls with lots of guy friends. Oh no, I thought. What have I gotten me and Y into? I should have told him to bug off ages ago. And before I could think of what to do next, he sent another text. "I have just thought about a great plan, my friend. I'm going to get some friends to attack her after her night shift tonight, and I'll jump in to save her. I'm sure that will win her over." The way me and Y ended things was bad. Don't get me wrong, but I wasn't about to let her get jumped by some weirdo and his friends, so I had to let her know. So I sent her a text. I explained everything in the text about her coworkers' plans for her after her night shift, and I even offered to pick her up and take her home. Her reply was unexpected, to say the least. "The guy you're speaking of doesn't work here. The only male coworker I have is the owner of this store. It's true that I am working tonight, but only until 11 p.m., and then I'm leaving with my friends. There's police, so don't worry about me." It was actually quite a relieving message, and I was glad that she was safe. But T, the guy who was texting me, genuinely was making my skin crawl. I mean, he didn't even work with her. So I sent him a text. "Look, creep, I told Y about your little plan. Don't lay a finger on her, got it?" And T didn't reply. When it started to get dark outside, I started to get twitchy. I was thinking of my ex working the night shift, thinking of that weird guy, and checking my phone to see if he had replied, but he hadn't. Rain started to fall, and it passed 11 p.m., his proposed attack time, and still my phone was silent. Nothing from my ex either, and I began to relax a little. Then my phone started buzzing. My ex was calling and I answered it. She was crying and in panic. She said, I'm on my way home. I'm by the station. What do I do? What do I do? A guy has been following me the whole way." "Who? What's going on?" I was in a panic too. "I'm too scared to look behind me." And the line was abruptly cut. My doorbell rang and my heart was racing. I went to the peephole and I saw my ex at the door. She lives roughly in the same neighborhood as me, and I quickly opened the door and let her in. She lives on her own like I do, so that's why I guess that's why she came to mine. She was white as a ghost and still crying, covered in rainwater too, and I locked the door immediately. "Did the person following you see you go into my apartment?" I asked. I don't know. I guess so. It was really close just as I got to your door. I guess, yeah, probably. Y said. I ran out to my balcony. I looked, but there was no sign of anyone out there. I grabbed my phone and I called T's number. I have all the proof I need to show them if you try anything stupid tonight. I couldn't hear a word, just the sound of rain crashing down in the background, and then his breathing. And then the line cut. I knew he was out there somewhere. I know that I should have contacted the police sooner. But when you're young, it's sometimes the last thing you think to do. Also, I was a real dick when I was younger. Maybe I was scared of getting in trouble. We sat and chatted all night, and I convinced her not to go to work the next day and to be ready to go to the police if anything happened. We shot nervous glances at the door all night while the rain lashed the windows. I was expecting to hear the doorbell at any moment. But thankfully, we went the whole night without incident. The next day I got a huge text from T, and it went something like this. I'm truly sorry. My name isn't T, and I don't work with your ex. I went into her shop and fell in love with her at first sight, and a couple of days later, I was in a local izakaya, and I saw her there. She was talking about the recent breakup with you, and she seemed like she wasn't fazed by the breakup. Well, at least her friends were making it seem that way. They mentioned your name, and they were all getting drunk too, and then they went to the toilet together. And that's when I saw my opportunity. She left her phone on the table, and that's where I found your number. I'm really sorry for what I did. After this weird confession, nothing further happened and I didn't hear from T again. I didn't know the guy's true identity or what he looked like, so I couldn't do anything about him. I couldn't report him, and I couldn't warn anyone about him. All I could do was I gave the police his number, and I did. But nothing came of it. This didn't impact me as much as Y, but so far was the creepiest thing that has ever happened to me. So T, let's not meet. When I was in elementary school, I was living with my dad. It was just me and him at home. Dad would make me breakfast at 6 a.m. every morning and then rush off to work. Most of the time, he would still be getting ready for work while he was eating. I would be left at home to get ready by myself and make my own way to school. One morning, I woke up with a terrible headache, so I figured that I wouldn't go to school that day. I didn't think it was a big deal to take a day off, because I needed to recover. I hadn't ever skipped school before, but since my dad was always home late, I didn't think that he would even realize that I had been at home all day, and I was looking forward to a relaxing day at home. I was wrong. My dad came home that day at around noon. I desperately tried to think of any kind of excuse as to why I was home. And my dad was really hot on education, and I knew that I was in for a scolding. I went downstairs to see him, and he looked at me and smiled and said, "Let's go for a walk." I was really shocked by this. I didn't give it a second thought, and I just agreed to go with him. I walked hand in hand with my father along a riverbank, and I should say that he wasn't the type to walk hand in hand with his daughter. But for some reason that day he did. I can't really remember what we were talking about that day, but I remember that I was smiling a lot. It was fun. I didn't think it was strange at that time. And after walking for a while, I felt that my dad's grip around my hand increased. I felt my little hand getting squeezed tighter and tighter. I looked up at him, and he was smiling. It was very unnerving. He then started pulling me along as he began to walk faster. Then, he started leading me down the riverbank towards the river's edge. I was a pretty tough and headstrong kid. I wasn't the type to cry, but that day I couldn't help it. My hand was hurting so much, it felt like my bones were about to break, and that wasn't the thing that made me cry though. I cried because of the way my dad smiled at me. It wasn't normal. It was horrible. It was unnatural. I really started screaming and crying loudly, and then my dad let go of my hand. I dropped down on the seat of my pants and kept right on crying, and I couldn't bring myself to look at my dad's face. After a few minutes, someone tapped me on the shoulder and started speaking to me. It was an old woman. I didn't know who she was, but she tried to calm me down, and she was kind and gentle. I couldn't stop crying though. My hand was throbbing, and when I looked up, I couldn't see my dad anywhere. With few options available to her, the old lady decided to take me to a nearby police box, and I thanked her for that. I didn't know where I was. I was completely lost. I hadn't ever been to that river with my dad before, and I didn't know my address correctly. All I could tell her and the officer was the name of the building that I lived in with my dad. So, we had to contact the landlord of my building. This happened a long time ago, and we didn't even have a house phone when we lived there. And once the landlord was contacted, he luckily knew where my dad worked from his tenancy documents, and then he called my dad's work. He didn't have anyone else to call, no mom on the scene, and I had no older siblings. My dad told the officers he would come and pick me up, and I started to get frightened again. When my dad arrived, I noticed something instantly. He was wearing the same clothes he left in the morning, and he always came home in his work clothes. This was not the man who tried to lead me down the riverbank. The man who did that was wearing a polo shirt and some jeans that I hadn't ever seen my dad wear before. My dad was really upset for me and worried about me, of course, but he was also furious that the landlord called his workplace. I don't know if his bosses gave him a hard time for leaving work early or something, but I quickly realized that this was my dad. I didn't need to wait to see him smile to realize that the real him was back. I really don't know what happened that day, how that guy looked so much like my dad and had access to our home. I know I was young, and I guess that you probably think that I could have made a mistake. But let me ask you this. How many times have you ever mistook your father or mother for someone else while they're holding your hand? You'd know it was them, right? I don't know what that was, but sometimes I wonder when I think about all the unsolved missing person cases out there, that something similar could have happened. And I would love to hear your theories.
It's 2016, around 4 a.m. in Shinjuku, Japan. I'm on a trip with my boys. Everyone is completely knocked out in the hotel room, except for myself. It was like the 5th day in, but for whatever reason, sleeping seemed like an impossible task this night. I was bored, yet wide awake. So I think to myself, I'm in the safest country ever. What can possibly go wrong if I step out for a bit? So I get ready, and I head out. Also, the hotel is in the middle of the Kabukicho, the red light district. At this point, you might have a good indicator of where this is going. This was actually my first trip to Japan, so I had no idea of the reputation this district had. I'm walking around for a solid minute, just looking for something interesting. Suddenly, this man of Nigerian descent jumps into my field of vision. I bumped into him before on my first night when my friends and I were heading to the hotel. He recognized me apparently. He kept asking if I wanted a drink or insisted that I should go visit his bar. I tried shooing him off and told him that I was busy, but the guy wouldn't stop following me. After 20 long agonizing minutes of pestering, he then puts his arm over my shoulder like we were best buds. and proceeds to ask me to go to his bar. Again, just one drink, he said. At this point, I figured, why not? One drink wouldn't hurt me. Maybe this guy just really needs the business. I was looking for something to do anyway, and it's 4 a.m., so this was the best I was going to get. Regret and paranoia sank in the very second I walked into this bar. It was empty. Nobody there besides a Filipino waitress who was not in the best shape, probably in her late 40s, and was scantily clad. He asked me what I wanted to drink. My fight or flight response was on, and in that moment I couldn't figure out why. I instinctively avoid ordering an alcoholic beverage, and I order an oolong tea instead. It was 2,000 yen, roughly $20 USA. It was also part of the policy to buy the waitress a drink as well. That's another 2,000 yen. After serving me, the Nigerian guy leaves the bar for some reason. He says he'll be back. I calmed down a little bit and I started planning my exit before he returned. However, me being hella passive at the time, and too nice, I get stuck in a conversation with the waitress. She was actually a pretty cool person. I'm part Filipino, so we had something to relate with, and we ended up talking about the family we have in the Philippines. Anyway, things ended up being okay. I cut the conversation short and politely made my leave. I walked down the narrow steep staircase towards the open doorway that leads outside, and I found my Nigerian friend with a good 5-man group of his Nigerian friends. He didn't seem happy I was outside. His eyes widened. His anger and frustration was very subtle, but was still noticeable for me. I walked towards him, and he walked towards me as he's about to re-enter the bar. It seemed as if he was about to reprimand his employee for not keeping his guest entertained. I smile and wish him a good night. He waves goodbye half-heartedly. I feel a strong burning glare from his friends as I walk past them. I don't make any sort of eye contact, so I walk back and return back to my hotel room safely. But for some reason, I feel faint and dizzy, unusually so. I immediately started to suspect that it was from the drink I ordered at the bar. I was safe though, so I didn't make much note of it. In the morning, I tell my friend about the incident. He facepalms and tells me that I got really lucky and that it was really stupid of me to walk in there in the first place. Apparently, the type of bars that include the one I walked into belong to the Yakuza. The Yakuza are known to hire Nigerians to lure tourists to their bars because they're usually not afraid to be aggressive with the tourists. And also, according to reports, they spike drinks of lone tourists, extort money out of you or your belongings, force you to sign credit card bills as you're drugged out, and once they're done with you, they'll decide whether to beat you almost to death or not, and then dump you somewhere, bloodied and half naked. I assume this is to meet the weekly quota. I was very lucky to leave that bar at the time I did. The most terrifying part to this for me is that if I stayed in that bar, probably even just a minute longer, I would have lost so much. I could have even been horribly hurt, insanely in debt, or even worse. PSA, this should go without saying, but the Nigerians in Japan are cool. Plenty of the ones I got to know in Harajuku were really chill. Nigerians that moved to Japan, for the most part, are just trying their best to survive, like any migrant that settles into a foreign land. However, sometimes that need for survival leads people to malicious jobs, like the one in this encounter, for example. It's unfortunate, but hey, a few bad apples does not reflect the whole tree. So if you do visit Japan, just keep in mind and be aware of kabukicho. Do not go into any bars there whatsoever. If you do run into someone that pesters you to go to their bar without any sign of stopping, a good tip I found now is to just yell, "Yamero, tasukete, keisatsu," and do this at the top of your lungs. Literally, it means, "Stop, help, police." Obviously a little extreme, but even a single word of the three gets the job done.
I grew up in the countryside, and when I say the countryside, I really mean the middle of nowhere. Honestly, there was literally nothing around. We had to drive through the woods and the mountains to go shopping. On the day this experience occurred on, it was dark. It was fall, and winter was fast approaching. My younger sister and I were in the car, and our mom was driving. We were heading to the drugstore and then the stationery store, and we did this often. I was really into origami and crafting at that time, and in the stationery store, they had this beautiful origami paper, and it was really cheap, so my plan was to spend all my pocket money on that. The drugstore was next to the supermarket, and my mom wanted to go in there. We parked in the parking lot. Mom and I got out, and I had to go to the drugstore with her, but when she said she wanted to go to the supermarket next, I couldn't stand it anymore. I ran off to the stationery store by myself. I got to the automatic doors and they didn't open. And then I noticed that there was a sign. It said that the store was temporarily closed. I was so annoyed, and knowing me at that age, I would have stomped my foot inside. I had little other choice but to go find my mom and my sister. I pleaded with my mom to take me to another stationery store, but my mom didn't say a word. She just started the car and pulled away really quickly. This wasn't like her. I sat back in my seat and I tried to think about what I said that could have annoyed her. It was so hard to concentrate on rational thought because my mom was driving faster and faster. I was scared and nervous, and my sister was as silent as my mother. It was really strange, and I stayed silent as my heart rate rose. We were still going fast, and we were approaching the crossroads ahead. The barriers were coming down, and my mom swerved into the opposite lane, and one of the barriers hit the roof of the car, and it made a thunderous sound. I was really scared now. No one was talking, and we were going faster and faster. I couldn't talk. I was young and terrified, and silent, salty tears rolled down to the corner of my open mouth. I couldn't understand what was happening. We made it across the tracks in the nick of time, and my mom suddenly made a U-turn and sped off in the opposite direction to our home. I was almost horizontal on the back seats with the power of the turn, and there was a car which had collided with a barrier and had skidded into the hard shoulder of the road. Another car had stopped behind it and might have rear-ended it. And in those split seconds, I think on some level, I could understand the reason for my mom driving like that. But I wouldn't find out the truth until later. I looked at her in admiration and saw that her face was a shade close to blue. She looked utterly terrified. It's a look that I have never seen before nor wish to see again. Despite all of this, my mom was still speeding down this countryside back roads. We went to a new and strange way home, but when we got there, my mom sat back in the driver's seat panting, and she looked exhausted. She looked at me, smiled, and said, "Sorry about all of that. I just feel really ill today. I think I have a stomach ache. I think I'm going to go to bed." Now, we never really spoke about what happened that day. I don't know why. I guess I kept waiting for her to say something, but she never did, and we all kind of acted like nothing happened. A couple of years go by, and by that point, I had completely forgotten about the incident, until one day, my sister told me the truth about what happened that day. Remember how I said that I wanted to go to the stationery store, and I had to go to the drugstore first? This all happened in that short amount of time. My sister was in the car reading a book or a comic, and she said that she had the interior car light on to read. It was dark out by the time that we arrived. My sister didn't go into any of the stores that my mom and I went into that afternoon. I didn't even notice. She said she didn't notice at first, but a car pulled into the same parking lot and parked close to our car. She looked over, and there was a middle-aged guy in the driver's seat glaring at her. He was moving his head side to side, trying to look into our car. But after a few minutes, he pulled away. But then, he returned in his car on the opposite side to get a look at both left and right sides, I guess. My sister noticed it because, one time it's kind of weird, but 2 times, it's deliberate, right? Something was off about that guy. Mom returns to the car at this point, and my little sister sees the same guy walking behind her by a couple of paces, and he was clearly watching our family. And as soon as Mom is in the car, my sister starts talking about what just happened, so Mom readies the car as she sees me approaching. Perfect timing, right? My sister said that she and Mom saw the guy holding something in one of his hands in the parking lot, and my mom said it was a box cutter knife. So the reason that Mom was driving so crazy that day was because the man with the box cutter knife was following us. And I didn't know it at that time, but he was forcing her to speed up. Mom says that she didn't want the guy to know where we lived, so that is why she made a U-turn and went a different route. The guy seemed to be clearly interested in my younger sister in the car alone, so God knows what he planned. That coupled with the fact that he had a knife, so it was really chilling. But it's not the most chilling thought that stays with me. I often think about what might have happened if the stationery store wasn't closed. What kind of danger we would have been in if I stayed longer and we couldn't leave straight away. I can't imagine the emotional toil that night must have had on our mom, but thankfully, I know she is strong, and for that, I am grateful. And I am, of course, and we are all still here.
I have been mountain climbing for many years. I've actually met some strange and interesting people along the way. I usually like to climb during the summertime, and I usually use my paid vacation to climb. I love staying in the mountain lodges and cabins. I tend to rent one on average for about a week. That year, I decided to stay in a lodge for a few nights before climbing. The lodge was really nice, one of the nicest ones I'd ever stayed in. It was actually used in the past as a forestry classroom for young climbers. It was very big. That being said, the facilities were kind of outdated. It wasn't too bad though. I planned to leave early in the morning and return to the cabin, if all being well, by lunchtime. Fortunately for me, the weather was on my side and I ran into a group of about 10 climbers on the way. The group was led by 2 adults and 8 children. Since it was summer vacation time, it wasn't uncommon to see parties like this. There was something odd about this bunch though. They hardly seemed dressed for a hike or a climb. They looked as if they were heading out for an afternoon stroll in the suburbs. I mean, I was used to seeing school trips at the base, but never on the advanced routes. No disrespect to them, but the climbing route I was on was definitely for adults. The group didn't seem all that energetic either. I didn't expect them to be bouncing all over the place and super excited to be there. But I also didn't expect them to look so downtrodden and low energy. I saw this group as I was heading back to the lodge, and after seeing them, I wanted nothing more than to go back to the lodge away from them. I got back in, and I felt as if the lodge reminded me of how old it was. Those log cabin walls must have seen and heard some stories. Anyway, I could tell that this wasn't a popular rental either. It seemed as if it hadn't been inhabited for quite a while. It was clean, don't get me wrong, but you could just tell that nobody had been there in a long time. There was dust, not thick dust, but notable dust. Dust that seemed to state, "Welcome, it's been a while." Other than dust, dead bugs, fallen leaves, and sticks that had found their way in there. It could have been unused for months and I wouldn't have known. It was interesting. I was used to cleaner and more modern lodges, but I tried not to let it bother me. Well, it beats sleeping out in the elements, I told myself. So I went to take a look at the facilities next. All the cooking equipment looked in fine order. I decided to make an easy dinner and enjoy it by a roaring campsite fire. There's just something so relaxing about watching a fire, isn't there? The sun had already begun to set and a starry sky was now in full view. I really was enjoying myself. The next morning, I had plans to take in a little bit of fishing and I wanted to get there early, so I decided to grab an early night. I was in my sleeping bag by 8 p.m. I positioned myself on the second floor of the lodge by a big window so that I could watch the night sky as it was beautiful. I drifted off after a while and then I heard a noise. It sounded like the door opened. There was definitely a sound of someone entering the lodge. I looked at my alarm clock. It was just after 10 p.m. Who the hell comes into a lodge in the middle of a mountain range at this time of night? I strained my ears to listen and try and place the direction the noises were coming from. It sounded like someone was walking around. I did wonder if someone had simply just made a mistake and mistook my lodge for theirs. The more I heard footsteps pacing around down there, the more I realized that there probably wasn't a mistake. It felt like someone had intentionally entered the lodge. Now, I didn't hear any words or conversation, just the sound of footsteps and the occasional sound of doors opening and closing. It was really weird, and obviously frightening. I stayed still and listened. The footsteps sounded as if they had a squelchy quality to them, like they were wet or muddy. I listened closely and felt a bolt of ice pierce my heart when I realized that the footsteps, they kind of sounded like they were climbing the stairs. I also came to the realization that there wasn't just one pair of footsteps, but several. I broke into a cold sweat. I knew there shouldn't be anyone else in that area. It simply was impossible, but I could hear those squelching footsteps. I tried to pull myself together and thought that if there was someone out there in need, a lost climber or group of climbers perhaps, then I should call out to them and offer them the use of the cabin. I thought that would be the only logical reason why somebody could be here. The footsteps reached the second floor. What are you looking for? Somewhere to sleep? I couldn't hear any voices, but people were here moving around the cabin in silence. It was eerie. The footsteps drew closer still. They sounded like they were outside of the room I was in. Fight or flight time, I told myself. And with that thought in mind, I called out to the intruders to let them know of my presence. Hey, someone's in here. I reserved this hut, just letting you know. The footsteps stopped at once, and the cabin went silent. Then, after a few moments, the footsteps started again. They seemed to be still coming from outside my door. What the hell were they planning? I asked myself. I felt that there was some kind of sinister intentions behind their silence. What the hell are you doing? I called out in a more aggressive tone. No response. No movement. Now, I don't believe in ghosts or hauntings, but I felt that something that night wasn't right. A fear I can only describe as mysterious. This weird standoff went on for about 10 minutes. I was out of the sleeping bag and on my feet, ready for anything, and I had a weapon. There was still no movement out there, so I approached the door and I listened. I heard something. It sounded like somebody was whispering. It was so faint that I couldn't make out what they were saying. It seemed incomprehensible. It was really creepy. After a few moments, I heard that strange squelching sound again. It sounded like whatever was out there was leaving the door. I heard those wet footsteps descend the stairs. They left the lodge, and I heard the door open and close. I raced to the window, and it looked like the shadowy silhouette of a small person, or maybe a child, as they were walking away from the lodge. It was so dark that I couldn't say with absolute clarity, but I think that was what I saw. There was more than one of these silhouettes heading away from the lodge and down the mountain path. They seemed to disappear into the night sky. Well, let's just say I stayed up all that night. I wasn't going to close my eyes until I saw the morning light. I thought that these shadowy figures would be back if I fell asleep. I abandoned my plans to stay at the lodge for the rest of the week, and so I descended the mountain in the morning time without any issues. And let's just say that I'm very careful about the lodges I pick to stay in these days.
I was living in Japan at that time, and I went out to this club or bar one night. I meet another foreign girl there, and by the end of the night, we walked to my place together, as she had missed the last train and I ran an Airbnb with plenty of empty rooms. While we were both visibly Western women, she didn't speak any English, but we were both fluent in Japanese, so we chose Japanese as our lingua franca. As we got out of the bar and walked down the street at 3 a.m., there is this little scrawny-looking middle-aged Japanese man in a suit. He was walking in front of us, and we quickly catch up with him as he is looking over his shoulder every so often, getting notably slower. When we get close, he turns around asking us for directions to the train station, which is kind of strange for a Japanese to ask a gaijin, or a foreigner. But then again, it was 3 a.m. and not very crowded. We explained to him that the trains don't run after midnight, something a Japanese should know, and tell him from where to best hail a cab. He quickly manages to turn the conversation around from asking for directions to admiring our level of Japanese and how truly he just wanted to talk to us when he realized that we were foreigners speaking Japanese so fluently. We thank him and try to excuse ourselves several times as he desperately tries to keep the conversation going, which goes from randomly asking directions to "I was curious about your Japanese" to starting to become somewhat clear that he had actually been at the same bar as us and already noticed us there. As we pressure to part ways, he suddenly gets very obsessed about exchanging line. That's the Asian version of WhatsApp, which I tell him that I can't do as my phone battery is dead. Again, he stops us from leaving, saying he was at least going to drop us his business card. He then proceeds to get out a wallet full to the brim with trash and random paper slips, going through every single slip several times while getting more and more nervous as he cannot find a card. This process takes him several minutes, in which he begins stuttering, sweating, and getting more and more jitterish. As my company is tired and pushing to finally be on our way, he eventually pulls out a handwritten piece of paper instead, with a username on it that he says is his Skype name and to please contact him there, while again lamenting what a shame it was that we couldn't exchange line instead. I finally managed to assure him that I'd contact him, and after awkwardly saying goodbye, he actually starts running down the street and around the corner. I chalked it off as a weird encounter and I didn't really think much of it, until somewhere that same week, my friend invites me to meet her in a town more than an hour away from where I live. We meet with someone there who lives way out in the suburbs, where there is absolutely nothing, and really only residents frequent the area, if anyone at all. We stand at a bus stop to go into town, when somebody approaches us from behind with the words, "Excuse me, can I ask for directions?" I turned around and immediately recognized this scrawny middle-aged man with his nervy mannerisms. He seems or acts surprised, but remembers me. We get on the same bus and he sits with us. He immediately jumps on the chance to ask me for my line contacts again, stuttering, jittering, and sweating as per usual. And as soon as I give in and we exchange contacts, he jumps up and says it's his stop. He jumps out the bus and again starts running down the street and around a corner. Now this time around, I was a little bit nervous since the coincidence was extremely unbelievable. I knew he wasn't from around the area, and this far out in the suburbs was not a place tourists visited. Also, this was a completely different town where I didn't usually go, and it had been a couple of days after our first encounter. Meaning, if he had intentionally run into me there, he would have to know where I live in order to follow me out of town. After he now has my line, he proceeds to send me a wall of texts every other day, even when I hadn't answered, saying how I was the angel of giving directions, how he was incredibly lucky to meet me whenever he was lost, and how he was looking forward to seeing me again and trying desperately to arrange another meeting with me whenever he was back in town. The whole thing stopped as I eventually left the country a couple of weeks later, and after asking me twice when I would be back in Japan, Corona happened and the borders closed, so he finally stopped texting. I'm having a hard time to think of him as an actual stalker, as I just can't imagine this level of commitment from someone I have literally no connection with, other than running into him on the street at night. However, sometimes I do wonder. It was definitely a strange encounter, ranging into creepy due to his antsy behavior. Update. The borders in Japan have loosened their restrictions a little, and the stalker guy immediately texted me again to ask whether or not I am one of the foreigners that have been allowed back in. I thought I was through with him, but I guess not. So a little background. I studied abroad in Japan a little over a year ago, and I lived in dorms provided by them. The dorms were a 20-minute walk from campus, but the way to get to the campus was to simply turn right for 1 block until you come to a main intersection with a Lawson on the corner, and then walk straight for the rest of it. This is important later, so please bear with me here. There was a small shortcut that cut across the intersection that I and many others would often take, but it went behind some apartments and through a small parking lot and playground. A friend of mine lived in his own apartment close to the school, and one night I was over there watching crappy TV shows pretty late, maybe past 1 or 2 a.m. I never liked staying over no matter how late it got, cause he had a tatami mat instead of a Western-style bed. Now, I've been to lots of big cities who are known for crime rates, and even live in a moderately sized one, and I've never really felt scared walking alone at night. This wasn't a big city in Japan, and we were outside of the downtown area anyway. I'm sure you're thinking while reading this that Japan seems like a much safer country compared to America and has a much lower crime rate. However, that's not exactly true. In fact, there is an extremely high rate of sexual-related crimes, and unfortunately, I had heard that the prefecture we were in had one of the higher rates of human trafficking. So anyway, I'm walking down that long stretch of road. It's past 2 a.m. at the earliest, and there are no cars or anyone else on the road. I started getting this weird thought in my head, strangely enough, because of a tweet that I saw earlier of all things. The tweet was one of those fear-mongering videos of compilations of people just driving up in a car and immediately snatching someone up. I never pay that stuff much mind, but for some reason, I started thinking about it on my walk. And then, about 2 blocks from that singular turn that I had to make, a car drove by. Like I said, I was feeling paranoid, so I mentally checked to make sure it kept driving. But it didn't. When I passed the crosswalk to the final block before my turn, it parked on the side street that I had just crossed. I thought, okay, weird, but you're just being paranoid. Just keep walking. I had headphones on, but turned my music off and was checking the shadows at my feet to see if anyone was approaching. Someone did. I couldn't tell you if he was trying to sneak up behind me or not, because as soon as I saw the shadow, I whipped around to see him. It was a young guy, maybe 20s, but I didn't look very hard. I don't remember exactly what was said honestly, and most of it was through a heavy language barrier. I just know that I very clearly ignored this guy as best that I could and gave very blunt evasive answers. I only remember for sure he asked, "Kiss? Kiss?" And when I refused, he pointed at the dark playground at the end of the previously mentioned shortcut and said something like, "This way, shortcut." The entire time this was happening, I was thinking, just get to the Lawson, just get to the Lawson. If you don't know, it's a convenience store, and it was the only place I knew that would be open, well lit, and have another person. At that point, he started pointing towards the shortcut, and was also when we finally got close to the Lawson. I don't remember exactly what happened, if I just dipped and ran across the street to it, or if I got him to leave first and then went over. All I know is, I have never been so happy to see fluorescent lights. A few seconds after I got inside, I saw the car that I had seen earlier. It definitely had multiple people in it, and it drove off down the street towards downtown and shouted something as it passed. I called another guy friend of mine who knew Japanese, just in case, and stayed on the phone with him until I got back to the dorms. Honestly, I don't know if I was just being paranoid or if this encounter was as sinister as I had imagined it. There are a lot of guys there who will assume if you're a foreigner or wearing shorts, which I think I was, thinks that you might be a prostitute. I had a couple of other encounters that were just very catcall type things, so it's not uncommon. I also know that in a previous year, our university actually had a guy who would creep around the dorms and then try to flash people. So yeah, this is a big problem here. I'm not sure which end of the spectrum of creepy it really was, but I am glad for Lawson's either way. I am a short-statured 17-year-old girl who stands out in Japan with big curly hair and foreign-looking features. Sometimes I get catcalled, get inappropriate winks, or even people creating unwarranted conversations in my everyday life. I've never felt like I was truly in danger, up until this day. I was walking in broad daylight to my nearest train station. The roads in Japan are very narrow and small, and there weren't many people on the street that I was going on. And as I turned into a long one-way sidewalk, I noticed a man staring at me through his car with an intense look. I continue walking, and he pulls up next to the long sidewalk, knowing that I would have to walk past him. I turn on my phone's video and record our conversation. He, in a very thick Nigerian accent, asks where I'm going, says I'm very pretty, and doesn't take no for an answer when I say I'm busy. Eventually, I walked off very fast and he stepped on the gas as if he was angry or offended. I call my boyfriend and continue walking on the long sidewalk, and then I see the man has blocked the exit of the sidewalk with his car. He got outside of his car and is waving at me with an eerie smile, and at this point, I'm shitting bricks. He's walking towards me and I tell him to leave me alone, and he says something like, "Are you proud?" I run away and behind me, I hear his car start up. I run into an alley and see his car turning as if he was still looking for me. And I still had a mile to walk by myself, and it was one scary walk. I still don't understand why he got out of his car, or what his intentions were. This happened a long time ago when I was in college. I was renting this one-bedroom dump of an apartment, It was tiny. The area wasn't too bad though. It was in a really quiet residential place. Despite it being small, I didn't have much else to complain about. Well, that was until all the activity happened. Weird things began to happen. For example, I woke up one morning to find a meter-long black hair in my mouth. There was an empty apartment next to mine, and I would occasionally hear a baby crying in there in the dead of the night. I regularly suffered with sleep paralysis and horrible nightmares. I lived in room 101, and I couldn't believe that I was the only person living in the block. It was quiet, real quiet. Occasionally, someone would move in, but before long they would move out. I mean, there could have been other residents for all I know. I just remember that the apartments were pretty much empty all year round. On the upside, it meant that there were always places to park and I could play my guitar as loud as I wanted without getting any noise complaints. I noticed that there were 4 apartments on the ground floor, but only 3 doors. I don't know why it was like that. I tried to figure it out. The apartments are shaped like a capital letter L, so from my apartment 101 up to 103, the doors are side by side. But there was a wall where apartment 104 should have been. The reason why I thought that there should be an apartment there was because, like I said, there were 2 floors and the layouts of the apartments were the same. And there was apartment 204 above where apartment 104 should have been. It was as if the door to apartment 104 have been covered by a wall. I tried looking in from the back, and all of the apartments in this building had balconies. There were lots of artificial plants in 104's balcony, so you couldn't see anything inside from the outside. It drove me mad. I really wanted to know what was in there. I thought about it a lot, and I arrived at the conclusion that all the creepy goings on must be related to that walled-up apartment. I couldn't get in there or even look in there, so I just kind of lost interest. I ended up living in that building for 4 years. Not by choice, I might add. College is expensive, but I finally finished college and began my job search, and after a few months of employment, I found a bigger and better place, and I prepared to move out. The timing felt right as the building had just changed hands and there were ongoing renovations. The day before moving day, I was cleaning my room and I went outside to throw out the garbage. I opened the door to head out and looked down the hall to see how the renovations were going. They were working on apartment 104 and they were breaking down the wall. I guess that the new owner of the building wanted to maximize his income by adding a new apartment. Smart move. So I threw out the garbage and headed back to my apartment. After some more cleaning, I headed to the nearby convenience store to grab something to drink. The wall was completely demolished now, and I could finally see inside, and better still, it seemed like the renovation crew was taking a break. I was thinking that this was the moment that I finally find out the cause of all the activity in the apartments. The sleep paralysis, the crying baby, all the spooky things. And my heart was pounding in my chest as I approached. I saw inside the apartment, and the place was covered with so much dust and soot, it was clear that no one had set foot there in years, maybe decades. And I could see the main room and the layout was pretty much the same as mine. The walls were black. I thought that it was just more dust, but when I took a closer look, I noticed that there was something else that were written on the walls. The letters were very small, but they were there. I think the original color of the wall in that apartment would have been white because my walls were white and the letters were white. Some letters were black though. They were almost imperceptible to the human eye. I really got a bad vibe from that place, yet I couldn't look away. It was like I was staring at something more than just letters on the wall, like there was something else in there. You know how you can look out at a body of water and your mind conjures up the idea of a deadly animal beneath the surface, like a shark or a crocodile? It was something like that. My eyes were glued to the wall and to those letters, and I could make out what they said because they were written so small, and I didn't want to go in there. It was all in hiragana, and on the right side of the wall, I was able to make out some of the letters. Masahiruya. It's not a word. I have no clue what it means. Although, once I read that word, I started to feel sick. It was time to leave. I wanted to be in a place where there were people, so I headed back to the convenience store. I pulled myself together after a while and then headed home. It was my last night in that building, and I am glad that it went without incident. The next morning, I was putting my moving boxes in my car and I saw that the entrance to room 104 was now covered up by some sort of tarp so people couldn't look in there. I started to wonder if the renovation crew discovered something more sinister than I did. About 2 years after I moved out, I kind of forgot about the place. Well, that was until I was driving past my old neighborhood on a day off. I decided to go take a look at the old place for nostalgia's sake. I wondered if anyone was living in 104. I drove slowly along the back road, which the balconies faced, by the car park, and I almost crashed when I saw something pretty shocking there. 104 was walled up again, and the plastic plants were back so you couldn't look in. Everything was how it was before. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was like looking into the past. I looked at my old place and someone was living there. Laundry was hanging out on the balcony and all the other rooms were vacant. I mean, there weren't even curtains in the windows. I have so many unanswered questions. What happens in that apartment block? What was the meaning of those words? Because whatever the renovation and owner discovered in room 104 made them put everything back the way it was. What did they see in there? Does the person living in my old place have the same sleep paralysis issues? And do they hear the same strange noises as I did? One thing I do know is, I won't be going back there. I feel so creeped out by that building. This happened quite recently. I was driving home alone and I was out in the sticks. Actually, it was a mountain pass. I was high up and I remember that right enough. It had been a late night and it was already past midnight as I was making my way home. I was speeding, I will admit it. I wanted to get home as soon as possible. There were like no cars on the road, no one around, and it was fine. At least, that's what I thought at that time. Then, something unexpected happened. As I sped around a corner, I saw a woman in red stood in the road. I was about to collide with her, but somehow I managed to swerve and miss her. My heart was beating out of my chest and I couldn't believe how close of a call that was. Due to the speed that I was going, I almost spun out. It was horrible. I put my car in reverse and spun around to get in the right lane for a start and then take a look to see if the woman was all right. I looked in the direction I saw her, and I saw that she was laying on the ground. I felt my heart drop. If I saw myself in a mirror, I know that I would have been as white as a sheet. So, I got out of the car after pulling it onto the hard shoulder and I raced over to her. I looked down and I saw a mannequin lying there on the road. It was the type of mannequin that you might see in an old clothing store. What I'm trying to say, I guess, is that it looked out of date and definitely out of place. I was incredibly relieved that I wasn't going to be in trouble for murder, or at the very least manslaughter. Once relief had settled in, anger came as fast as I drove that night. I was very annoyed that someone would do that. I mean, they intentionally placed that thing just at the bend of the curve. They knew that they would cause distress to drivers approaching. I picked the mannequin up and threw it to the side of the road. I may have even kicked that thing out of anger. I really can't remember. I started back to my car. And then something dawned on me. I needed some sort of reassurance because I couldn't leave the scene without knowing what the hell just happened and why. I'll be honest, I did start to believe it could be a person rather than a mannequin. I kept asking myself why to questions that I couldn't answer, and the number one question that I couldn't answer was, why was there a mannequin out here in the middle of nowhere? I was too curious. I could already hear myself explaining the story to my friends and not having a good of enough ending. Not having any form of answer to the same questions they would ask me. I turned back to take another look at the mannequin. Why was it wearing red and lying in the road? I took a closer look. I am not ashamed of this, but it's a little weird. I pulled down the mannequin's clothes and I am glad I did, because I found something. I guess you could call it a clue, or there was something written on her back. There was a name, birth date, a profession, and a town name written there. I don't want to say what it was because it might be referencing to a real person. It gets a bit heavy from here on out, so fair warning if you are easily triggered. The message written on the back of the mannequin went on to say that the woman that they had referred to in the message was a victim of a violent sexual assault, and due to the trauma she suffered at the hands of her attacker, she decided to end her life the following day, presumably right where I was. I looked out towards the darkness over the guardrail. A dark drop was all I could see below. The message went on to say that the attacker will never be forgiven. I will never forgive them, was written again and again until the point that the pen ran out of ink. I was filled with a profound sadness and an overwhelming sense of horror. I don't know if it was a prank or something, but it felt real. I didn't want to be there anymore. It was at this point that I noticed that there was another car parked just out of sight. I don't know if that car was abandoned. Heaven forbid it belonged to that woman, and it hadn't been towed yet, or if it belonged to another person who positioned the mannequin out there. I think the latter. I don't know why, but I get the sense that I was being watched. I didn't drive on that mountain pass again for about a year because it really freaked me out. And when I did pass through again, I didn't see the mannequin again. This happened when a buddy and I were on our way to a ski resort. I was driving and my friend was co-pilot. He sat with the road atlas across his knees, and this happened before sat-navs and smartphones. I remember every 5 minutes, My friend was saying, "It's not much further now." I was kind of in a bad mood since the snow looked as if it was going to stop. My friend had the smart idea that if the snow was easing up, we could take a shortcut through a kind of country lane. "This is a complete failure," I said to him. "Nah, man, we're getting so close. I got a good feeling about this shortcut. It's fine," he replied. I wondered if this trip was going to be worth it or not. I thought of turning back because if there was no fresh snow, skiing wouldn't be as fun, but I couldn't just pop a U-turn on the highway. So, trying this mountain road may give me a chance to turn the car around if I needed it. I got on the mountain road and made sure that I went slow and steady. The trees were dense and in full growth, and this road was dark and basically a mud road. Some light upbeat music was playing on the radio. It was in complete contrast to the two of us in the car. We weren't speaking. I wanted to get back on the main road, so I sped up a little. Nothing but trees, no houses or anything. We were on this road for about an hour when finally we saw some signs which showed that the mountain pass was coming up. It was at this point my friend said, "Hey, look at that! There's something there." I saw a figure of a man stood by the side of the road. I slowed down to see what was going on, and the guy by the road started waving us over. He was smiling and I guess he looked about 30 years old. I pulled the car over and the man approached. He knocked on the passenger side window of the car. I opened the window a tiny bit and he said, "Thank you for stopping. My car broke down. Do you think you could help me out?" I didn't see a car, so I said nothing. My friend didn't say a word either. Something was off. The man tried to jam his fingers through the gap in the window. "Hey, open it." I hit the central locking just as he was trying the door. "Hey, come on, open it." His friendly rescue me persona melted away. He was angry and aggressively trying to get in my car. He kept rattling the door. "Open it!" He then pulled a huge hunting knife out. "Get out of the car now!" At that point, I hit the accelerator and we peeled out there, leaving the man running after us. Always keep your wits about you and stay safe out there. When I was in high school, I used to take these late-night baths usually at around 2 a.m. My classmate and childhood best friend lived next door to me, so sometimes we would stay up super late at his house, and then when I get home, I would take my bath and get to sleep. I used to sneak out to go over his house. My parents didn't know I was up that late, and our bathroom is on the bottom floor too, which was why I was able to take late-night baths without waking the whole house up. So one night, I snuck out as usual to go over his house for another night of gaming, and just before 2 a.m., I snuck back in and headed for the bathroom. I was going about my business as quietly as possible, and while I was in the bath, I heard a scream. I knew that scream. It was my friend's scream. It scared the hell out of me, but before I started to panic, I let the logical side of my brain kick in. What's wrong? Did you see a cockroach or something? I wondered, but then I heard another noise. There was now a banging sound coming from next door. It sounded like it was one of the shutters on the windows. What the hell? Was someone out there? I wondered. Just as my heart rate began to rise, the noises stopped. Concern replaced panic, and I was genuinely worried. And after a few moments of silence, I heard another noise. It sounded like one of the trees close to my friend's house was now swaying. I had heard them make this noise during heavy winds and also typhoons, but never on a night like that. There was a dense tree line between our two families' properties. It usually helped hide me when I snuck out, but now it sounded like it was hiding something else. It wasn't even windy outside. Then after a while, the trees near our house started shaking like crazy too. My panic was back. Whatever scared the hell out of my friend seemed to be very close to our house. I heard the tree that was closest to the bathroom shaking, and I knew that the tree overlooked the bathroom. I was thinking that it could be a wild animal or something. And either way, I needed to get out of the bath because I felt very defenseless in there. I got out, I put a towel around myself, and slowly approached the window. I looked out there and I couldn't see anything. It was dark and the bathroom was a little steamy too. I wanted to know what was out there. I needed to know, so I did something dumb. I opened the bathroom window. The second that I opened the window, I looked up a little and I saw a pair of eyes staring at me. There was a woman, halfway up the tree, glaring at me wide-eyed. Her face seemed unusually pale, and she was expressionless. It was as if I was looking at a living mannequin. She had short hair, and she was wearing a dark raincoat. Seconds or perhaps minutes passed. We were just looking at one another. My feet felt as if they were frozen to the floor. I felt as if I couldn't look away, like a deer in the headlights. Then, a drop of water fell from the faucet into the bath with a loud splash, and that brought me back to reality. I screamed at the top of my lungs and I scrambled to close the window. And once the window was shut, I locked it. I heard the sound of the tree branches and leaves moving, and then I heard a thick, heavy thud land outside on the ground just beyond the window. The woman was right there behind the window, and only a thin layer of glass separated us. She stood there and stared that stony face stare at me. She raised a finger and began to tap at the glass. I backed away from the window towards the bathroom door. The taps grew into knocks, and the knocks grew into thumps, and before long she went hammering on the window. I thought that it would break. It was at that point that I heard my dad shout something from the upstairs window. I opened the bathroom door and I got out of there. My body felt ice cold, and I stood there in my towel shaking and terrified. My dad went outside, but before he got downstairs, the woman was already gone. The next day at school, I asked my friend what he saw, and he confirmed that he saw the expressionless woman banging on his window too. He said that the woman was singing in a quiet voice, "Open the window, open the window." I was scared for days after that. She haunted my dreams. We quit the late night gaming sessions, and I never took a bath that late ever again. Even as an adult, I don't like to be in the bathroom at night for extended periods. She never came back, but I don't think I can ever get her expressionless face out of my memories. It was the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. This is a very weird and frightening experience, which happened when I went to stay with my parents. I had been at university, and it was a nice chance to take a break from hitting the books. That night, I had dinner with my mom and dad. I took a long, relaxing soak in the bath, and I headed back to my childhood bedroom to get some sleep. But for some reason that night, I just couldn't sleep. I decided to get out of bed and grab my laptop. I figured that I could read some stories on 2chan until I felt sleepy. So I get back into bed with my laptop. My parents had already gone to bed, so the house was pretty much silent. I think that it's always this way at my house at around 12 a.m. We live out in the countryside, so it's always quiet. The only noises would be that of the various household appliances or the bugs outside. I was reading in silence until about 2 a.m. when suddenly my concentration was broken by a noise. It was the sound of laughter. It sounded as if it came from just outside my bedroom door. A chill raced down my spine and I froze in place with my eyes locked on the bedroom door. Unknown laughter in the dead of night is terrifying enough, but there was something much more frightening about that laugh. Because that laughter was my own. I was so scared by this phenomenon, and I reverted back to my childhood state. I crawled underneath my blankets and I cowered there, and I just kept thinking, that's my voice. Again and again. However, enough time had passed for me to consider that since I hadn't heard the laughter, or my laughter, for what felt like hours, perhaps I could go to sleep. Perhaps whatever was out there was gone. And while I was mulling that over, I guess I fell asleep. And in the morning, I asked my sister, who was sleeping in the room next to mine, if she heard the laughter in the hallway, but she said that she didn't hear anything. I wonder what the hell that was. Was it my doppelganger or something?
There is one strange story that I remembered. I went to my friend's apartment a long time ago. Whilst I was eating and drinking, I suddenly felt like I wanted to have a smoke. But you see, smoking was prohibited in my friend's apartment. My friend tells me that we can go up to the rooftop because people sometimes go up there to smoke. So, up we went, up to the rooftop to have a cigarette. It feels good. The weather is fine because it is summer. This was around 1 o'clock in the morning at this time. As I was smoking, I hear a voice saying, "Hello, hello, hello." What? This sounded so clear. So I look around, but there is no one here. But I can clearly hear a voice saying, "Hey, hello." After a while of this, a knocking sound joined the mysterious voice. "Hey." What is this noise? I began to focus more on the source of the sound and pay attention to where it is coming from. And now, I can clearly hear the sound coming from the water tank up on the rooftop. This already frightened me, as this should be impossible. I should not be able to hear voices and movement sounds from inside a water tank. I thought, this is dangerous now. Whatever or whoever is in there, they shouldn't even be alive anymore. But they are calling to me. The thing is, I needed to walk right back past that water tank in order to get back inside the apartment. All the while, "Hey, hello." It continues constantly, and it's getting faster. Slowly, I approached the water tank. I was convinced that there was something in there, something with malicious intent. It is still calling from the inside and hitting the inside of the tank hard. What frightens me is that this is not a call for help. There is no fear or panic in this voice, just pure malice. When I was right alongside of that water tank, I hear a very, very loud. Very quickly, I open the door and I run down the stairs. Suddenly, an old man about 70 years old, he is staring up at me from just inside his apartment. He stares at me and he says to me quietly, "Do not go up there at night. It will kill you."
I saw a doppelganger for the first time in my life. I work far away from the town that I grew up in, and I live alone. It's my first time living alone, and I have had to take my time to adjust to it because I still do get bouts of homesickness. I live very far away, and I think that the distance makes it worse because I rarely see my family. Within the first few months, homesickness really set in for me. Then something unusual happened, and I had the strangest feeling that there was someone in my home with me whenever I got home. I don't know how I could possibly explain those first inclinations of someone being in the home with me. It was like a hint or a sign, but nothing concrete. I guess, for the situation I am trying to describe, I would be better off saying that I felt a presence rather than a person. But it shifted. It became something more than just hints and signs. It became auditory. I began to hear light footsteps and then soft sighs. I, perhaps like you at this stage in my experience, thought that I was just homesick. I longed for the sounds of a house full of life and a day-to-day noise. Of course, I really missed home. But the sounds I was hearing weren't the sounds of home. They were the sounds of something entirely different. I heard the noise of a young woman. I could tell by the sighs. It felt as if I had a roommate that I couldn't see. I was very aware that I wasn't alone in my home. I believed that there was someone here with me, and I even began to understand the rhythm of their life. For example, when I left for work, I would often hear the bathroom door close and the toilet seat drop. I know, I sound kind of crazy, but I have had so many experiences about these things in my apartment which I can relate back to the noises I heard. For example, the sound of the bathroom door opening and finding it left open when I went to check. Also, the sound of the kettle being turned on and gently moved. It always felt as if it was left in a different place than I left it in. Yet, I still kept my skepticisms, and I still doubted what was going on. I decided that if it was nothing but a forgetful mind and auditory hallucinations, then perhaps a trip back home and resetting my mind might be in order. When I met up with my parents again, I bared all and told them about my experiences, and to my surprise, my mother told me something that I didn't know about myself. I'm not that surprised things are moving around or doors are left open. I mean, you did sleepwalk as a child. Both Mom and Dad smiled at my realization. I had no idea that I sleepwalked. I had no memory or awareness of it. Well, that's because people who sleepwalk don't tend to remember it, Mom said. I mean, I guess that sleepwalking was a more favorable outcome than a ghost or a home invader, so I accepted that theory for a while. But it was only when I returned back to my apartment that I was reminded of the occasional feminine sighs that I heard. I grew so used to the noises that I gave a name to the person who I thought was making them. Another girl. I am a female, you see, so it felt as if there was another girl living here with me. Life with another girl went on with no problems. I started to have dreams though. I dreamt that when I got home, The position of my shoes at the door changed. I put this down to another girl living in my home. It went on and on like that for a while until the moment that I met her. I was leaving for work. It was early morning and I was pretty sleep deprived. And there she was, stood right before me. My eyes caught hers and she looked as exhausted as I felt. For some reason, we nodded at one another and walked past one another. She walked into my house and shut the door as if nothing was unusual about it. I didn't know what to do other than walk away, and I just carried on my morning routine. I was so scared on the train. The reason for this was because the person had no difficulties walking into my home, had the same face as I did. I was convinced that I could have been looking into the mirror when I saw her. I felt physically sick for the rest of the day. I am always exhausted from working overtime, and I don't usually like to go out after work for drinks, and I often get invited by my colleagues. But that night, I felt like going. I just wasn't ready to go home. I think I must have not looked good that night. I must have had terrible bags under my eyes, and said my eyes have been looking off into space, contemplating what might potentially be waiting for me at home. I stayed out until the last train home, which was about 6 a.m. That was so unlike me. When I got home, I realized that the person who looked so much like me from the day before might have been my future self. There was no one there when I got home, no one but me, and I noticed in the morning that some of my stuff had been scattered around the room. Well, I guess that isn't that paranormal after a night out. The rent wasn't cheap and the building wasn't old, so I didn't think that the home had a history or anything like that. I didn't hear any rumors about my building either. Ordinary people lived here with not that out of the ordinary lives. That's me included too in that statement. And rather than thinking that I was being haunted by myself somehow, the only way I have been able to come to terms with my situation is by thinking that I am living in some kind of time slip. I somehow tapped into a different time and space. I heard that when you meet a doppelganger of yourself, your days are numbered. I am still kind of worried, to be honest, which is why I'm here. I am here because she is still here. Another girl is still here. I can still sense her in this apartment. If she leaves, then maybe I will die. I am homesick again, and I really want to go and see my parents. I just want to get rid of everything, you know? My work, this apartment, another girl. I just want all of it to go away.
About 3 years ago, I decided it was time to move out of my parents' house and begin a life of my own. I had been saving my own money for some years now. I have always been good at planning ahead, and so by this time in my life, I had a considerable sum of money and thus was able to afford quite a nice apartment in the city centre. I think people who like scary stories will understand this, but this property I found so cheap. It was a so-called accident property. At that time, I did not know of anything like that, so all I was focused on was the fact that I had scored such a great deal, even if it was an accident property. So, I decided to move into that place immediately. Over the next 2 weeks or so, I went about my parents' place and my new place. I used the 1 million yen I had saved, and I prepared household goods and decorated the room with my favorite furniture. The completed house, it was truly a dream come true for me. The only thing I was curious about was the presence of a black stain in the center of the room. The carpeted floor, it is beautiful, with a colour somewhat in the middle of white and yellow. But there is this black stain, and it does not disappear, no matter how many times I clean it. I didn't really care about it at first, but after a while, the presence of it just bugged me. So after about a week of this, I bought a rug and hid the stain so that I could not see it. Then, little by little, my daily life changed. One day, when I came home from work, I opened the refrigerator to grab a beer, but the fridge, it was turned off. There's no way this should have happened, so I simply thought the fridge had broken down. While I was plugging and unplugging the power, cold air flowed. That's odd, I thought. Later on, when I was taking a bath after having my beer, the hot water, it stopped coming out. I remember thinking to myself that the real estate agent had lied to me. This is no accident property, it's a defective property. I remember feeling furious at the time. Other small, trivial things kept on occurring in the weeks to follow. The gas range does not light up. The light in the room, it does not turn on. These things continue to happen, and it begins to worry me. One day, I was off work, so I was planning to just play games all day at home. It is not often I get a day off, so I wanted to enjoy it. When I wake up in the morning and eat, I notice that a strange, fishy smell, it fills the room. I did not buy any fish, so where does this smell come from? I checked around the entire apartment, but I cannot find the source of the smell at all. Figuring there was nothing I could do to stop the smell, I just started spraying perfume, just to cover it up at least. This was enough for a short-term solution, and I was able to settle down and enjoy my games. I must have become very immersed in my game, because before I knew it, it was getting dark outside. I grabbed my wallet and I was heading out to buy dinner. This house, it has a corridor when you open the front door, and if the light is not turned on, that area, it is very dark, whether it be day or night. There is a toilet in front of the right side and a bath in the back of the right side, and there is a door leading to the living room in the back. When I opened this door, leading to the hallway to go and buy my dinner, I felt a feeling of dread as I stared up toward the door. I felt that there was definitely something there, standing in the dark. This was not a feeling I could pass off. It felt as real as if a person was standing directly in front of you, someone that you could clearly see with your eyes. More frighteningly, the further my eyes adjust to the dark, the more I can faintly make out the outline of something very real standing there. I could not judge whether this was a person or something else, but my instincts, they pointed to something else. All I could do was stand there, as in this moment, I did not know if any sudden movements might cause this one to rush toward me. I could feel the cold chill from the vent on my neck, and I felt a nasty sweat gushing out of my whole body. Out of nowhere, just as I am weighing up whether to turn the lights on or not, I heard the sound of the front door slamming strongly. When I turned on the light in the hallway, I looked around, but I could see no one there. However, a strong fishy smell wrapped the place entirely. much worse than before. After that incident, coupled with all the other strange happenings in the place, I decided to tell the real estate agent that I was moving out. Strangely, he did not argue with me or try to put up any resistance. He just signed the papers without argument. Now, I live in an ordinary rental property. No past history or anything of the sort, and I live a peaceful life. Even now though, when I find myself in a dark room or a corridor, I feel like something is looking at me, and I need to leave the light on always. Be careful of the places you move into. Do not carelessly take the first bargain you come across. Some buildings, they have a dark history that they cannot let go of. Do not go to these places. You will regret it later.
I heard this story from a good friend of mine. He said that it happened while he was staying in a cabin in the mountainous woods with some friends. As soon as he entered the room, he smelled something dreadful. He said that he had never smelled anything that disgusting in his life before. Him and his friends were tired and just wanted to relax, but they had to go in to search for the source of the stench. He looked everywhere and couldn't find anything in the room that could cause such an odor. They didn't think that they would be able to spend the night there. One of his friends opened the closet, and in there, they found a hatch in the ceiling. A board was slightly out of place, and the smell was even stronger there. They found that they had access to the attic. Naturally, everyone was imagining the worst, but one of his braver friends offered to go up into the attic to find out what was up there. He quickly moved towards the hatch and hoisted himself up, and as soon as he was up there, he was back down. He fell and he was scrambling away from the hatch in the closet. There's a guy. There's a man. He's sleeping up there. Everyone was shocked and couldn't believe that there was someone sleeping up there. Could someone who smells that bad be alive up there? The guy who went up there said that he was grinning while he slept. Everyone was freaking out that there might be some homeless guy in the lodge sleeping above them. So another brave friend stepped up to the hatch to take a look, to tell the homeless guy to get out. He took a flashlight with him and shone it in the dark, dusty attic. The flashlights fell upon a dark shadow lying on the ground up there, and the smell was almost unbearable. A pale white face stood out in the darkness, and indeed, there was a man with his eyes shut grinning. He was grinning in a very strange way, so my friend decided to move in closer, and the man's eyes didn't open either. Could he not feel the bright light on his face? Or maybe sense the presence of others with him in the attic? My friend drew closer, and the man continued to grin in a strange manner. It was like his mouth was wriggling. And when he got close enough to see clearly, he almost fainted. The man was dead. It was obvious. The movement of maggots were manipulating his lips, with their feasting to give the appearance of a grin. The original poster's experience ends here, but there was an interesting comment in the thread, which I will now read. It said, "Whoa, that's amazing. I actually have a very similar experience. A mutual friend said something about a rumor of a homeless person hiding in the attic of a lodge out in the mountains like your story. We were interested in exploring urban legends at that time, so we all decided to go in search of the lodge. My friend was adamant that he knew where it was. There was a lodge where he said it would be, but we found nothing in the attic. It was really a bit disappointing, and we kind of forgot about it. About half a year later, we were in the same area and we thought that we'd try and find the lodge again. We got back to the same lodge, and it was some unmanned one which people rarely checked. We were in, and we headed to the closet and went to remove the panels there to gain access to the attic. When we looked up there, we found nothing but dirty magazines and some bedding up there. There was no sight of the owner of those items, and the attic was vacant. There was a terrible smell up there, but I guess that was because some homeless people were hanging out up there. I said aloud for some reason, no one up here." One of my friends was having a look around, and he lifted up the bedding and said, "There's something sticking out here." He then said it was kind of sticky too. I spun around thinking that he is touching some kind of discharge or effluvia, and I go to chastise him. But then, I see a mummified hand protruding from the bedding. Yeah, we bolted. We clattered down from the attic and dashed down the mountain to the nearest police station. They checked the lodge out, and we had to make statements. It wasn't a fake hand up there. It was real. I was expecting to find nothing and believed that my friend had heard some urban legend created by an internet troll. But I was proven wrong. It was a wild experience, and I wouldn't have shared otherwise if it wasn't for OP's post.
This is the story of when I lived alone for the first time. It was my first experience of living on my own, and I felt both excitement and anxiety. I was young, and my expectations were not quite realistic. I was looking all over for a place that was low in price, close to the station, and the building was new. However, of course, it is very difficult to find a place that meets these conditions. So on the advice of my real estate agent, I decided to choose a place that was a little bit older. When I first arrived to see the inside of this apartment, I was thinking to myself that it must be an old and shabby building. However, I was surprised to see that it was quite beautiful. The inside of the room was a little bit grim, and I had the impression that no one had lived there, not for a very long time. But the sunlight was good, and there was excellent storage, and the bath had a reheating function. So in my haste, I did not ask any questions. This was just a bargain, as far as I knew. I moved in the very next day, and I began my new life. The sun comes in through the windows and it feels good, nice and bright, and it gives me a hopeful feeling. But once the sun was gone and the night set in, I began to feel lonely and a bit scared. Well, it was my first time living alone, and I thought that I would get used to this soon. But I just couldn't seem to calm myself down, even after many days passed, and I found I could not sleep. Finally, after many sleepless nights, I managed to get some sleep. But this did not last long, as I woke up to a noise that I could hear from somewhere. What's that sound? I tried to move my body and look around the room, but I cannot move at all. I am frozen in place. I begin to notice the source of the sound. It is coming from the bathroom. Is it the shower? It sounds like water is dripping. Of course, I should have closed the faucet tightly before going to bed. Then, something strange happens. the sound of the dripping water, a sound that you would think would be confined to one space. It begins approaching from the bathroom. I felt a wave of dread in this moment, because this should not be possible, and I was in a state of panic. So I closed my eyes and I said loudly, "Help me! Help me!" I shouted it over and over again. However, this sound, it simply continues approaching me. Mercilessly, it ignores my pleas, and when I open my eyes fearfully, I saw it. When I notice it, it begins moaning at me, an awful sound, dripping with sorrow, anguish and pain. I tried so hard to move at this point, but still I could not. I did not want to keep my eyes open anymore, to witness the awful sight of this thing shuffling toward me, the sound of dripping water accompanying it. I tried to close my eyes sometimes, but then, every time I would open them back up, this one, it would appear much closer to me. Finally, in an absolute last resort, I close my eyes and I shout as loud as I can, "Go away! Go away!" My heart, it runs very cold, as in response to this horrible thing leans very close to me, and I feel the damp breath right beside my ear as it screeches into it. I wish that now I could tell you I blacked out. I wish that at this time I could tell you a common story trope about how I opened my eyes and nothing was there. But this was not my reality. The reality was that when I open my eyes, I see a mess of dank, wet hair falling over my face. I see cold, dead hands moving up over my face, and I feel that this thing, this horrible thing that has emerged from my bathroom, it is no longer on its feet terrorizing me. It is no longer dwelling in my shower. No, it is in the bed with me. Those next 6 hours until the sun will come through my window again, they are the most frightening hours I have ever experienced. For with every breath, I did not know, if I disturb this one, will it attack me? Will it kill me? Will it take me somewhere? I lay there, in my bed, very still, daring not to breathe heavy, daring not to shift in the wrong way. All the while, this one clinging onto my back. I do not exaggerate when I say that had I been given the option to end my life right there in that moment, I would not have hesitated. At some point in the morning, finally, I was relieved that the room was bright and my body was able to move again. And ever so thankfully, this thing was gone. My first thoughts, thinking back, regardless of how real this experience felt, was perhaps sleep paralysis, as I could not move my body. This would explain everything. The noises, the hallucinations. No matter how real it felt, this couldn't possibly be real, could it? Those were my thoughts. Until two things happened that morning. The first of which was, I called my real estate agent, and after much discussion, she did tell me, eventually, that this was in fact an accident property, the site of a person dying. I knew then why this place is so cheap. The second of which was when I checked the shower. The water in the shower, it had stopped. And in fact, the faucets were turned off tight. But when I looked down at my feet, there is a puddle. The water stains, they did not stop at the bathroom. They continued to the side of my bed, dotted like footprints.
Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. I would also like to give some extra love to my Patreon members, my channel members, and also my tippers. Thank you so much. If you would like to extend a little bit more support for the channel, don't forget to leave a like and a comment down below. If you would like to become a Patreon member, a channel member, a tipper, or even to buy merch, check out the links in the description below. Again, thank you. And I hope you stay scared, because your fear feeds me.